trying to. Okay, well, I'm here to talk about some very radical ideas you might have heard a little bit about before. They've been called a hoax, alarmist, scam, and my favorite, recently, I saw this recently this month, radical tyrannical beast. Well, I'm talking, of course, about the tooth fairy. No, I'm talking about the greenhouse effect. Now, I heard a couple little giggles there. I had hoped that there would be, uproarious laughter, but I figured that some of you guys already know a little bit about the greenhouse effect, and that it's been there are some people who have questions about whether it's a problem or not. And I was thinking today, well, why am I preaching to the choir to people who may already know about some of this stuff and might already care about it? And then I realized that actually you are my perfect audience, because there are lots and lots of people who have heard about global warming and know that it's a problem and know that it's causing issues around the world, and they'll get worse, but still go about life as normal, business as usual, and we really can't continue to do that. So it's the people who already know but need to care more that I'm interested in talking to, and I hope that that I'll help promote a little bit more concern about this topic and perhaps some more action. And actually, at the very end, I will urge you to think about one particular thing that's something that you do, many of you do all the time, that perhaps you might not give enough thought to, that makes things worse. You would think that global warming, this radical idea that is often criticized on Capitol Hill as being something brand new that scientists just discovered, but in fact, people have known about this, some parts of it, for a long time. And we're talking about climate science. It's a science, and science, of course, changes over time. We discover new things. And so oftentimes people come to me, my own father actually, and say, well, is it real? And of course, there isn't an it. We're not talking about we're not a religion, like is there God? Climate science has many different aspects to it, and I'm going to talk about some of them. Some of them are more well-known than others. Some of them are and more well-established, and others are more speculative, and there's constant research. I'm sure on this campus there continues to be. So you can see these guys, we're all involved in doing research on the greenhouse effect, which is just a part of this, and that, as you all no doubt have heard, that carbon dioxide has an insulating effect on the planet. If we didn't have any carbon dioxide on Earth, that would be very bad. We'd be more like Mars. The carbon dioxide traps in the right amount of heat for us to be nice and warm, but not too toasty. We don't have that much. It's not just carbon dioxide, of course. There are other gases, but carbon dioxide is the major one. And if you get too much carbon dioxide, of course, you look like Venus, which has the surface of Venus is the temperature of molten lead. We wouldn't want that here. Now, the problem is not that there's carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but that could be too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And as you may know, the amount has been going up steadily since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. There's no doubt there that that's not in contention. Burning, this chemical reaction when you burn things, and carbon dioxide is produced, and it accumulates in the atmosphere because it doesn't, the rate at which it's pulled out of the atmosphere by reacting with things and being pulled out by plants, stuff like that, is relatively slow compared to how fast it's going in. So the level keeps on going up. And so at the same time, we've noticed the temperature has gone up. Temperature's gone up about 0.7 degrees centigrade over the last 130 to 50 years, and That's, you know, about 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit. And we would expect that just from first principles. You don't need computer models. You don't need any speculation. You would expect that if you put in more of this insulating gas around the atmosphere, that you would get higher temperatures, and that's what we do. That's what is seen. Now, you know, you could see from that chart, temperatures have been going up and up. Of course, there were some wiggles along the way, and those have to do with lots of things like, well, I'll talk for a second, you know, the sun's, the amount of radiation coming out of the sun changes a little bit. There are volcanoes out after Mount Pinatubo in the 90s. Temperature went down for a couple of years because of that, because it emitted particulate matter that shaded the sun. Then there's, you know, we're measuring surface temperature, but maybe there's absorption of energy, but it doesn't, it's somehow stored somewhere else other than on the surface, like in the ocean. So that's all these things give us those wiggles. That's why it's not a straight line. But on average, it's been going up. And so 2014 was a record-breaking year for the globe. And last October was the hottest October ever measured. And because of that, most likely 2015 will be another record-breaking year. So we have, this is up to 2013, and that's 2000. Oops. Well, that's what most likely that's what's going to look like at the end of this year. Basically, oh no. That's 2014. There we go. That's 2015. So we're going to be most likely we're going to go up even above last year's record. Now there are lots of ways that we can see that the temperature that things are changing. And they're changing in ways that one would expect. We have glaciers are melting, mountain glaciers are melting, polar ice sheets are melting and shrinking. We have warming in the oceans, warming in the atmosphere, higher moisture. We have springs are coming earlier. There are many, many indicators, and that's having big effects too. So how do we know that people are doing this? Well, like I said, from first principles, you know, just pure physics, you could calculate what you would expect. But scientists like to have to approach problems from many different directions. And so there's another way you could try to prove that people are causing this. And one way would be to take computer models and that represent the atmosphere and the environment, and you add in those things from nature that you know are going to change the temperature. Like I said, volcanoes, the sun, and then and whatever other factors that you would expect. Like, you know, there's certain things that are chaotic that just change a little bit every year. More might be stored in the ocean or in one part of the whole ecosystem, the whole Earth system that we're not measuring. And so you could say, okay, well, with all those things taken into account, what would you expect that the 20th century to look like? And this is what you would expect it to look like. You would expect a lot of wiggles, but it wouldn't. Basically, temperature wouldn't be going up, maybe even down a little bit. So then you can say, okay, but let's add in to that the carbon dioxide that people have released and the other greenhouse gases. And let's see what we would expect if we added all those things in our computer model. And this is what you get. It's exactly the observed, what we've observed. In other words, if our model contains everything that we know that affects the climate, including the human component, it looks just like what's happened. I mean, very close. And that's why the International Panel on Climate Change has concluded that people are most likely the dominant influence on the change in temperature. And the IPCC was set up by the United Nations to issue studies on this. They've issued, I think they came out with the 5th one, I believe, in 2013. And essentially, each time they come out, it's more dire in terms of what the impacts will be, and it's more certain about the human causes of those things. Now, okay, so why should we care? I mean, what's the consequence of all this? Well, this is probably one of the most visible consequences on the planet. I mean, you can see this from space. Of course, nowadays with Google Earth, you can see just about anything from space. But people still say you can see things from space when something's big. This is the sea ice. This is a graph of sea ice in the Arctic Ocean at the top of the planet. And every year during the summer, the sea ice, which there's an ocean the Arctic Ocean's at the top of the planet, and it's covered with sea ice. Almost to the edges, which includes Alaska and Greenland and a lot of Russia. And during the summer, the sea ice melts around the edges and shrinks, and it just becomes like a little shriveled white yarmulke on top, and then it expands again the next year. And so one common measure of just how much it's changed is to measure how big it is at its smallest point, when it's the smallest, and that happens in September at the end of the summer. And so this is the summer. This is the September sea ice extent. How many million square kilometers there are? You can see that it's been going down ever since they've been able to measure it accurately, which is when there were satellites that were up there orbiting the Earth, and it's gone down by about 15% per decade for the last 30 or more years. And anybody who has thought about compound interest knows that if something is going down at 15% per decade, it's going to be pretty low, pretty fast. And so it's expected that there will be essentially no summer sea ice not too long from now. And now some people expect there to be some inflection point, a point at which it's going down kind of straight and then it falls off. And people talk about tipping points. That would be a tipping point. There are many possible tipping points. The problem with tipping points is that sometimes you can't tell that you've reached a tipping point until after you've tipped. There's a guy that I interviewed named Lonnie Thompson, a quite renowned glacier researcher, who said to me, there are tipping points, but we probably won't know. We'll see it in the rear view mirror. So it'll be after it happens, and that's the problem. So it's possible that we've reached on the Arctic sea ice, that we've reached that, and after about 2007 there was this huge dip, and that was the inflection point. So maybe that's the rate at which we're coming down, where it's decreasing now. We just don't know. This is a little video about sea ice that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration put together, and this shows the sea ice every month since the 80s. And the lightest, whitest part is thick multi-year ice. That's ice that's lasted from season to season, and then the bluish, the more blue it is the newer the ice. So that's ice that formed last winter and is just there for one season. And what you can see here is that this is just another way of gauging the health of the top of our planet. The multi-year ice is disappearing, meaning that it's very unhealthy ice cap there. The multi-year ice is very important for many reasons. And you'll see that around the early, like around 2007 or 2007, 2010, all of a sudden we pretty much stopped having multi-year ice. Now, glaciers or ice is melting elsewhere on the planet as well, especially mountain glaciers. Mountain glaciers are, there are glaciers, mountain glaciers just about everywhere on the planet. Australia doesn't have any, but New Zealand has some tall mountains. South America has the largest chain of tropical mountain glaciers, or chain of mountains with tropical glaciers. Of course, they're the Himalayas. We've got the park formerly known as Glacier National Park, which, of course, I'm just joking, it's almost out of glaciers now. But this is Mount Huascarán in Peru, and I visited there a few years ago. And in the Cordillera Blanca of sort of central Peru, Peru has lost 20 to 30% of its glacier volume. Looks pretty nice right now, but if you could compare that with 1980, it would look a lot different. And so it's lost 20 to 30% since 1980, and every chain of mountains with glaciers essentially is losing ice. There's probably a certain area here or there that's not, for complicated reasons having to do with weather patterns. I was reporting a year and a half ago in India, and there in northern India, there's certain I don't know if they're small, but certain sections of the Himalayas that aren't losing ice, but most parts of the Himalayas are. That just has to do with particular aspects of the weather systems. Global warming, no one ever said it was, Boston warming or, Bombay warming or whatever. It's global. So the weather systems, patterns of weather will change conditions locally. The things don't all go exactly in sync. So on average, basically every mountain glacier is melting, and that's a problem. Well, it's a problem for tourism right here because a lot of people go to the Cordillera Blanca to visit the mountains. It's also a problem for people who live there. Mountain glaciers, this scientist I mentioned before, Lonnie Thompson, calls mountain glaciers the water towers of the planet. They store up water during the cold period of the year, and then they release it during the warm period of the year. And that's really important for river flow. So the rivers during the driest times, with little times of least precipitation, will be getting extra water from the glaciers when the glaciers, when the top surface of the glaciers is melting. And that means that that your river flow is buffered. That's important for people who use water for agriculture, for people who use it for drinking water, and for industry. So when your glaciers are shrinking, actually initially it might not be so bad. In fact, a lot of people don't realize this, but that as the glaciers are melting, you might get more river flow for a while. Because there's the glacier, scientists call this fossil ice. It's ice that was frozen there hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands of years ago, and is gradually being melted. So you're being showered with this wonderful fossil ice, but it can't go on forever. The glacier will no longer be there at some point. So here's a woman I met near the town of Huaraz, and she tells the story of another problem with melting glaciers. Glaciers advance and retreat depending on the climate, and during ice ages they can advance very far and grow thicker and bigger. And during even smaller periods of cooling or warming, they move forward or back. And when they move forward, they create they bulldoze a bunch of the crushed bedrock in front of them, creating what's called a moraine. And there are moraines in this area from the last ice age because this area was covered in ice during the last ice age. And some of the hills are actually moraines, and they're just crushed gravel. And the glacier is streaming out of valleys of the mountain, and it pushes forward a moraine called a certain kind, a terminal moraine, which is like it'll form. Each glacier is a little bit different, but it can form like a big kind of bowed wall. And then when the glacier melts back, as they're doing now, the ice separates from that wall, and there's a space, and the water is coming off the glacier, and it's basically filling up that space. There's a basin there. There's a natural reservoir. The problem is it wasn't designed properly to be a reservoir. It wasn't designed, and it doesn't necessarily do a good job. It might fill up as a lake. It might be a big lake. It might have millions of gallons, hundreds of millions of gallons, and that poses a huge danger because it could be that as the lake fills up, it just at some point there's just too much in there and it breaks, or a rainstorm is the straw that breaks the camel's back. And once of course, it's not completely waterproof like the Hoover Dam or something. So there's water is coming, water is leaving through its base and trickling through the rocks. But there's enough water being added, so it keeps its volume. But if there is some catalytic event like heavy rainstorm or something big splashing into the pond, into the reservoir, which I'll tell you about in a second, that catalytic event can start a little flow over the top. And the flow is powerful enough so it pushes some of the rocks and material out of the way. And the flow gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it feeds on itself, and the whole thing collapses, and it creates a humongous flood, a tidal wave. And that's why I was talking to this woman, was because she is the victim of a flood like that. It wasn't a huge one. There have been huge ones. In Huaraz, the next the town nearby of 100,000 people. She lives in a small town, and she lived probably too close to the river that was coming out of one of these natural reservoirs. And a humongous piece of ice broke off of the glacier. It's called a hanging glacier that has a piece that's just hanging above the reservoir, and it broke off and fell into the reservoir, or the big body of water, and created a tidal wave. And that tidal wave splashed over the unconsolidated dam, the gravel barrier, broke it open, and a huge wave of water that picked up boulders and everything in its way, trees, mud, and she was basically near the bottom of the ravine where this thing emptied out. And when I visited her, there were boulders this big that had been brought down from above. I mean, that's how powerful this was. And her little adobe house, which was probably no bigger than the space in between these tables, was just washed away immediately with all of her possessions and her farm animals. There are many places where this could happen around the world. And there are people who are studying, trying to figure out where they are, and trying to figure out what to do about it. I mean, one thing you can do, of course, is you can make sure people aren't in the path, or you can drain them. You can actually put big pipes. You can dig holes in the base of these glaciers to try to make sure that they just don't get too full. Or if a big thing falls in one of these hanging glaciers, it doesn't make a big enough splash to create to breach the base or the embankment. Now, another consequence of a human consequence of all this change has to do with sea level rise. We all have heard a little bit about sea level rise. The sea is rising right now about 1/10 of an inch per year. Now, that doesn't sound like very much. Over time, it adds up. So every 10 years would be an inch, and 100 years it would be 10 inches or almost a foot. But the problem is it's probably not going to, so that alone is, a foot in 100 years. Well, a foot of water, ocean water, could be a problem, but the 100 years is perhaps enough time to do what we need to do, build up dikes and whatever. But the problem is that it's not going to stay at that rate. It's expected that it's going to go up. There are three things that lead to higher sea level. One is these glaciers, these mountain glaciers. And the other one is the ice caps at the ice sheets at the bottom of the world in the Antarctica. Antarctica is a continent covered with an ice sheet, and Greenland is essentially like a continent covered with an ice sheet. And those are melting. They're huge. They take a long time to melt, but they're melting. And there's some concern that one of them, the West Antarctica ice sheet, may have reached one of these tipping points where, although it will take a long time, and we don't know how long, there's nothing we can do actually there are positive feedbacks that will make it collapse completely at some point. And so in any event, so sea level is rising. And so what's the problem with that? Well, here's one example. In India near Calcutta, this is a place called the Sundarbans. It's a huge mangrove forest. And people like to go there. Visitors go there because it has Bengal tigers and it has a lot of very unusual birds. The people who live there live on islands that used to be covered during high tide. And they made them habitable by building mud embankments all around them. And this is an example of one. I took this from a boat, this picture from a boat, looking up on the embankment, and you can see there are trees on the other side. You can't see the basis of the trees because they're below sea level. And so those people are like living in a bathtub, except the water's on the outside of the tub, not inside of the tub. And if the embankment gets breached, the water fills the tub. And so they're constantly battling the sea here. And the rise of the sea is dangerous for them. This is Mohammed Sheikh, who I met on Sagar Island near Calcutta, and he has a little tea shop right near the mouth of the Ganges River, where people go to. It's a pilgrimage site, and I met him about 4 or 5 years ago, and about 10 years before that, there was a big storm, and the storm broke the embankment near his land. He had something like 40 acres of land where he farmed rice. He had a fish ponds and farmed other things with his family, and the dike breached and basically immediately washed all his land away. And so this is where he lives now, in this little tea shop, and he basically has no land and no other way to make a living. Another aspect of climate change, we talked about warming temperatures, like what's the big deal? It's going to warm a little bit, right? Well, temperature extremes are going up as well. Temperature extremes are really dangerous. Heat waves are really dangerous. In this is Patrick Pellew, who I interviewed a few years ago in Paris. He was a emergency room doctor in 2003 when a very severe heat wave struck all of Europe, southern Europe, and southern and central Europe. It was the worst heat wave in recorded history in that region. There'd never been, no one had ever seen anything like it. It's considered I mean, there isn't any precedent for it, but it's considered to be a once-in-a-thousand-year event. So just something not very likely. It was, for those of you who know anything about statistics, you'll appreciate that it was 5 standard deviations away from the norm. That's very, 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 very unlikely to occur. And so it wasn't just a little warmer than the previous heat wave. It was like, if this is normal temperature, this is you know, the most recent heat wave, and this is the heat wave of 2003. And Patrick Pellew was the first person to notice, like, too many people are dying, and he alerted the country to the fact that they were just getting too many people dying. And of course, you see, when people come in to die, you don't know why. You know what's the immediate cause, but what's the big cause? Is this a pattern? And he was thinking, you know, this is something unusual. And you can't, you know, someone dies of a heat-related illness, you know, some respiratory thing. You don't know if they died of the heat wave. They just were hot. But they subsequently calculated that there were 1,200 more people died that summer than should have died or normally would have died during the same period. 12,000 extra people died in France, and 70,000 extra people died in Europe. So it had a huge effect. One reason why they died, now this wouldn't have been like that unusual in Boston, actually. France is actually, Paris is pretty far north. I don't know exactly how far compared to Boston. It's north of Boston. And it's normally pretty cool there. So they're just not ready for these conditions. They don't have their windows, they don't have the ventilation. Nobody has air conditioning practically. The hospitals weren't, I don't know about today, weren't air conditioned. There were people who were lining up to get into these underground these caves that Paris has that were used for quarrying rock by the Romans, called the catacombs. They now actually have people that they put the cemeteries. A couple of century or two ago, they filled these caves up with people's remains to make room in the cemeteries for building Paris. But anyway, so they're called the catacombs. People were lining up around the block to get into the catacombs to cool off. And so Paris is just not ready for it. And a lot of elderly people live in these teeny little apartments. There's a name for them. I forget what it is. But it's like, this is where when your in-laws get old, you stick them up in one of these places, and then you go on vacation in the summer, and they stay up there in this stuffy box. And they all, you know, a lot of them died. They weren't that healthy to begin with, and they were in a stuffy box. And there were many, many people, poor people, who just didn't have didn't have any way of kind of getting away from the heat, whose bodies were never even claimed by anyone. And they're in this cemetery on the outskirts of Paris. These are all people who are unknown. People don't know who they are. So this sounds pretty serious and worrisome. So clearly we're doing something about it because we fix problems, but actually we're not. You can see that's what the picture of the fuel use looks like in the world. It's exponential. This only goes to 2000, but I don't think it'd be that much different in 2015. And that means that in the future, we're likely to see, well, we're definitely going to see more warming. and maybe a lot more. This is what the 20th century looks like. And this would be if we stopped burning everything. I mean, we didn't burn any more carbon fuel. We just got wind and solar and nuclear power and bicycle power and whatever. It would still go up. And the reason why it would still go up is simple. When you go, if you turn your thermostat down during the day so you can conserve energy, and then you go home at night, you turn it down to 40, let's say, or 50, and then you turn it up to 72 when you get home, or if you're trying to conserve, you turn it up to 66. Well, it's not going to go up right away. You've set the point at which you want it to be, but it takes a while to get there. Well, the dial of the planet, the control knob, is carbon dioxide, and we've set the temperature pretty high with the level of carbon dioxide we put in, but we haven't reached that temperature yet. So that's what's going to happen, even if we don't, if we stop every sort of fossil fuel use today, which of course we can't do. So it's going to be up higher than that, and we don't know how much higher. These are scenarios produced by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The red line is basically what we're doing right now. That's called business as usual. That's more than 4 degrees centigrade, which is 7 or so degrees Fahrenheit. That's a lot, considering we only have right now, we're only at 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit. That's going to have huge impacts. That's what Jim Hansen, the climate scientist who used to be the head of Goddard Institute of Space Studies in New York, called a different planet. Now, even these other scenarios that they've looked at are still serious. People talk about 2 degrees Fahrenheit, centigrade as being the important benchmark. I'm not sure. A lot of people aren't sure that it's conservative enough. But even by that benchmark, it's going to be very hard to get to 2 degrees, to stay under 2 degrees. You can see we're getting near it, even if we stopped everything. So I'll just give you a sense of what this means for the future. This is where we are today. You can see we're up. This is carbon dioxide level. Remember, it used to oscillate between. It used to. We started. Let's see now. Well, this is the last 800,000 years of history. As seen through ice cores. And this is the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere for the last 800,000 years. And you can see it oscillates between about between about 190 or something parts per million and about 300 parts per million. You can see about the highest it's ever gone was right in the middle there is about 300 parts per million. So that's the normal, that's the envelope of the Earth for almost the last million years. The last time it was at 400 was 4 million years ago. It was a different climate, completely different climate 4 million years ago. And remember I said that carbon dioxide is the knob that controls the climate. So we've set the knob up to 400. We haven't gotten to the temperature that we've set yet. So we're already we've already locked ourselves into something that unless we can start taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, we're locked into whatever temperature goes with 400 parts per million, which is considerably higher than today. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you look here, you see this is the Earth's temperature has oscillated in synchrony with carbon dioxide for at least hundreds of thousands of years, and we know this because of ice cores. From ice cores you can measure the amount of carbon dioxide at various times in the atmosphere because you can get little bubbles of carbon dioxide in layers of ice going all the way to the bottom of ice sheets. And you can tell with various kinds of analyses what the temperature was. So basically, we know that that we've had these ice ages every 100,000 years, and carbon dioxide is high when it's warm and low when it's cold, and high and low and high and low. That's what we're seeing here, is the changes in carbon dioxide. So let's look at the last one cycle of the ice age cycle. This is the last 150,000 years. Over on the right is the present, and that's when carbon dioxide was relatively high. It was 280 parts per million before the Industrial Revolution. And you can see that right there, sea level is set to 0 on this chart. It's just, we'll call that 0, today's sea level. Now, in the last ice age, which is, this is a chart of sea level. So the last ice age, sea level was 400 feet below where it is today. All that water from the ocean was stored in ice sheets on the poles. There were glaciers, a huge glacier covering where we are right now. Well, if you go farther back in time, you get to the last warm period, kind of like today. It's called the Eemian. And you can see that, like today, there was high sea level. But note, it sticks up a little bit above today's sea level. Now, the last warm period was 2 degrees warmer. This is one place where this 2-degree number comes from. 2 degrees warmer than the pre-industrial temperature. So going up 2 degrees, making the planet 2 degrees warmer then was enough to melt enough ice from the glaciers so that the sea was higher. Now, how high? We don't know exactly, around 10 or 15 feet higher. The temperature of the planet determines how much ice is melted. And well, carbon dioxide determines the temperature of the planet, and the temperature of the planet determines how much ice is melted. So we would expect that, that when carbon dioxide goes up to the level of the last warm period, we would have a temperature of the last warm period, and we would have the amount of ice of the last warm period, which is much less ice than we have today. That's those little bumps. Those little humps stand for 10 or 20 feet of sea level. Now, we're at 400 parts per million that we're at now. We have more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere than we had during this last warm period. So it's quite likely that eventually we are going to get to this 10 or 15, 10 or 20 foot extra sea level. We don't know how long it'll take. Is the worst offender in the world, but that's because China has many more people than we have, and, which people often forget, a lot of our stuff comes from China. That's where a lot of their energy is, what a lot of their energy is used for, is to make stuff for us. A lot of people are saying, well, we got to think of this differently, not where stuff is made, but where stuff is used. But per capita, we're pretty much the worst in the world. I mean, there are a couple of oil-rich countries, rich and oil-rich countries like Qatar in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, that are higher than us, even much higher. But they don't have that many people. We have a lot of people, and we're all using a lot. Now, would it be possible to use less? Well, look at Denmark. Denmark uses about half as much fossil fuel as we do. They produce half as many tons of carbon dioxide. I meant to change that. They use half as much carbon. They produce half as much carbon dioxide as us. Now, the question you might say, well, what's it like living in Denmark? Maybe you don't want to live like Danes. Well, people laugh when I show them this. The happiness index. They're supposedly they're the happiest people on the planet. Maybe they're just happy because we're talking about them. But this is, you know, we all know that social science is not that good. But it tells you something. It tells you something, and they're certainly measuring something. We don't know exactly what, but it's worth thinking about. Why do they seem to come across as being happy despite the fact that they have such a low carbon footprint? But let's look at something a little bit more objective, maybe. Gross national product, pretty good. I think this may be less objective, a measure of well-being than happiness, because who's to say whether our measures of gross national product are really a measure of well-being? But anyway, they're not that different from us. They're a little bit smaller. Their probability of living to 60 at birth is the same as ours, a little bit higher, and their life expectancy is the same as ours. They seem to be doing pretty well. We're not talking about India. We're not talking about, I don't know, Haiti. So how did they do it? They've got very dense housing. A friend of mine photographed this. I was reporting in Northern Europe over the summer. And so dense housing is good because it means that people don't have to travel for that far to work. Also, housing that is close to places where people work. The model in the United States is the suburb model, is that you work in one place and you live one place and you work somewhere else. Well, that's not very good for your transportation carbon footprint. So they've tried to change that in Denmark. Then they have amazing infrastructure for bicycles. Absolutely amazing. You can see they've got special lanes. They've got these blue things in the intersections so that people know that there are bicycles there. They've got special lights. They've got the lanes are not part of the street in most places. I think this is referred to as armored lanes. There's actually a new one I've heard about on Western Avenue in Cambridge. It's an armored lane. It keeps the cars out of your lane. The painted lanes are nice, but cars tend to ignore them, and so it means that people are not going to feel safe riding. So they feel safe riding there. Everybody rides there. People ride with their kids there are these bikes I saw there with these giant baskets in front, these big wooden baskets, and I saw a lot of couples where the one person is riding the bike and his girlfriend or boyfriend is in the basket in the front getting a lift. They make driving harder. I mean, you got to make bicycling and all sorts of other kinds of human power easier and driving harder. Many plazas in Copenhagen were parking lots until a couple decades ago. Now they're plazas, and people are the center of the city is a wonderful place to walk around, very dense. And I had dinner in this plaza, and then we had a terrible time getting out of there in our car. Not the plaza, but in the neighborhood nearby, because they're designed to be hard, basically. They don't want people to drive. They want people to find other ways. Now, also alternative, different forms of energy. This is actually in Sweden. This is a district heating plant. In the Netherlands, almost all heating is from district heating plants, and those district heating plants are using waste energy. They're taking waste energy, sending it in highly insulated conduits into cities to heat people's houses and commercial spaces. And you can see that trench in the background is where the pipe is going away. These are, I'm pretty sure those are stacks of wood, and they've got sawdust there. This is waste material that they're burning here. We saw a district heating plant that was a solar district heating plant. They were heating hot water and then sending it in these insulated pipes into a nearby city. And that saves a huge amount of energy. It's much more efficient than having everybody have their own boiler. Of course, they have amazing infrastructure for bicycles. It's a cool bicycle path. Wind power. You know, the cost of wind power has gone down by a factor of 10. There's a huge amount of wind power in the Netherlands. I forget what percentage, but it's very high percentage. I mean, I was hoping to get information on the difference between those two windmills here. I mean, those dinky ones are probably would have been considered big a few years ago, but look at the size of the big ones. This is in Holland. Just a massive amount of wind energy. This is in Germany. Look at this. This is a pretty big backhoe there. And then solar voltaics. You know that solar voltaics, photovoltaic power, solar panels, has gone down by more than a factor of 100 in the last 40 years. They are almost as cheap. It's almost as cheap as making electricity by burning coal. And the question, you know, it is more expensive, but what's the price of burning coal? Now, so here's my last slide, and this is the challenge to you. I don't think that we're going to solve this problem individually. We need policies. We need a serious commitment. But on the other hand, I think that individuals do bear responsibility. It's all of us added together that makes the problem. And what is one of the most most climate-intensive things that any of us does? It's air travel. That's why I was saying that a lot of people I know who care about global warming or appear to don't get it. When we fly willy-nilly here and there, whenever we get the thought that we want to visit a place or a person, we're making it's causing, it's making a serious contribution to this problem. I could insulate my house and put in a new boiler and ride a bicycle and completely wipe that out by going on a vacation to Machu Picchu. So we need to think about our air travel, and I'm sure that not every one of you flies a lot, but a lot of us do. I fly a lot. I try to think about it, though. I try to keep in mind, do I really need to do that? And I think that we're probably going to be flying less in the future. Maybe they'll come up with technologies for flying that are considerably more climate-friendly, fuels that are like hydrogen, fuels that are produced from renewable resources. But I suspect that in the future there may be less flying because it's going to be too expensive. See, it's too cheap right now. It's going to become expensive when we start taking the cost of what we do to the planet seriously and make it expensive to engage in activities that produce a lot of carbon dioxide. So that's it. I'll be happy to answer questions. What's that? Okay, sure. Yeah, in the back. Oh, yeah. That I was actually going to say that. I can't. Oh, yeah. Okay. The question is, are other forms of transportation just as bad if you travel the same distance? I can't say I'm much of an expert on that, but I have looked into it a tiny bit. There are two problems with air travel. And I can't tell you I can't tell you exactly how those, what the balance is between those. But one of the problems is that we just travel farther when we're going by air, and that's what you're alluding to. We wouldn't think to drive to go to a weekend wedding in California, but we might fly for a long weekend to California. The other problem is that they do fly, planes fly high in the atmosphere, and they inject some greenhouse gases. The carbon dioxide, I don't think, is the problem there, because the carbon dioxide, once it's up there, it's going to spread out everywhere. But I believe that there are some greenhouse gases that get injected way up in the stratosphere, and that's a serious problem.